While the town of Arizona's Summerton Junction prepares to cheer for their high school football team at an away game over the weekend, Sheriff Ray Owens opts to stay behind and enjoy his day off. Seeing the mayor off despite him carelessly parking his car in the fire zone, Ray gets to the local diner for a hearty breakfast. Overhearing a hushed conversation of a couple of truckers on their way out of town, Ray asks them about their route, insisting that they are simply transporting auto parts and mentioning that they have to make it to New Orleans by the next day. The two then rush to exit the diner. Deciding to trust his intuition, however, Ray leaves the diner soon after them and makes a note of the truck's registration number. He then goes over to where his deputies are slacking off with vintage arms collector Louis Dinkum. Refusing to listen to any excuses from his deputies about needing a source of entertainment around town, Ray asks them to run the plates of the truckers and instructs them to pass the information ahead to the troopers. Elsewhere, the rig arrives at a farm and Thomas Burrell is informed about some kind of trouble with the owner. Always up for a challenge, Thomas meets the farmer in question, Mr. Parsons, and introduces himself. Lying about shooting a commercial on the property in exchange for compensation gets him nowhere, however, as the only thing Mr. Parsons is really interested in is kicking them all off his property. When he pulls the trigger to threaten the intruders away, Thomas pretends to give up and then has him executed instead. At the station, meanwhile, Deputy Sarah Torrance argues with Frank, her imprisoned ex, who is a friend of Deputy Jerry Bailey as well. When Jerry wonders if his friend has to remain locked up, Deputy Mike Figueroa reminds him of Ray's orders to have him locked up for the entire weekend. Jerry then asks for Mike's help with running the plates Ray asked for earlier. Later that evening, Mike goes over to Ray's place and reports that the truck has a clean record. Needing more action and adventure in his life than their town can offer a young deputy, Mike expresses his wish to move to Los Angeles. Having gone through the same emotions as a youngster, Ray promises to help him look for a vacancy in the city after warning Jerry about the city's thrill not being easy to handle. In Las Vegas at 3:30 a.m. later that night, Agent John Bannister arranges for international crime lord and race car driver Gabriel Cortez to be moved to federal death row. Hoping for smooth transportation under the radar, the convoy sets forth. While they wait for clearance at a junction, Gabriel's henchmen begin executing their daring attempt for his escape. Noticing the vehicle being lifted to the roof of a nearby building, Agent Bannister hurries to get his men there in time while Agent Ellen Richards covers the alley outside. Meanwhile, Gabriel and his men zipline from the roof to another building, even as the backup that John requested arrives on the scene. While the police is kept busy having to chase multiple decoys wearing orange prison garb, Gabriel changes his outfit before heading out. Coming across Ellen on the way, Gabriel takes down her partner and grabs her as his hostage. Checking on the situation soon after, Agent Phil Hayes joins John as they realize that Gabriel has indeed managed to slip away from federal custody. Irritated by excuses like supporting the Dutch national football team to explain why the decoys are wearing orange, John is pulled out of an interrogation. Meanwhile, Christy from the diner at Summerton informs Ray about Mr. Parsons having missed the early morning milk delivery. Since this has never happened before, Ray promises to look into it while Phil explains Gabriel's escape to John. Realizing that Gabriel is now driving a modified Corvette ZR1 which was recently stolen, John instructs for it to be reported to Intel so it can be tracked down. In addition to aerial surveillance, Gabriel has the hurdle of a blockade to get through as well. However, he zooms past all the cop cars in the way to get away with ease. Following Ray's instructions, meanwhile, Sarah and Jerry arrive at Mr. Parsons' farm to check on him. The police still attempt to pursue the Corvette even as Gabriel skillfully races it through traffic at speeds of over 200 miles per hour. In retaliation, John sets up a blockade at Bullhead City in an attempt to nab Gabriel and curb his escape. Contacting John using Ellen's phone just then, Gabriel threatens her life in return for safe passage. Ray, meanwhile, is informed about Mr. Parsons' passing when the deputies come across his corpse. While the police close in on the blockade at Bullhead City, Gabriel gets his men in action. Expecting Gabriel and the Corvette, the cops are surprised when an armed attack is launched instead. Successfully obliterating the authorities, the road is then cleared for Gabriel to continue through the blockade without any trouble. Meanwhile, Ray and Mike investigate further to speculate the unfortunate fate of Mr. Parsons. Sending Sarah and Jerry to check for tire tracks outside, Ray then closely inspects the gunshot wound on the corpse to conclude that it did not come from a pistol. On the other hand, Sarah and Jerry realize that the culprits went in the direction of the canyon. In a bizarre twist, Ellen accepts a bribe from Gabriel which then stops her from continuing to be his hostage. Skillfully manipulating the car's speed just then, Gabriel smartly hoodwinks the aerial surveillance unit, much to John's bafflement. Figuring out that the town of Summerton Junction falls on one of Gabriel's possible escape routes across the border to Mexico, John decides to contact the sheriff. Speaking to Ray then, John informs him about sending a SWAT team their way and mentions letting them handle things if the situation arises. In the middle of the Parsons investigation, Ray patiently listens before eventually hanging up while trying to connect the dots of the sudden action in their town. Having followed the trail toward the canyon, meanwhile, Jerry and Sarah come across a few of Gabriel's men. Sensing major danger, Ray asks them not to investigate further by themselves even as he rushes to join them. However, Jerry is fatally shot just then, and Sarah scrambles to take cover. Single-handedly launching an attack then, Sarah allows Jerry to get out of harm's way, instructing his men to wear their night vision gear. Thomas Burrell then orchestrates the retaliation by switching the lights off. Unable to gauge the danger, Jerry is shot again while making his way to Sarah. The attack then converges on Sarah just as Ray crashes in and swiftly takes down a few men. While the two work together to get Jerry to safety, Mike joins the skirmish by exchanging fire with Burrell's crew. Once Jerry is safely in the car with Sarah, Ray drives away with them just as the vehicle of the deputies goes up in flames. Despite Sarah trying her best to distract her colleague and to keep him talking as they rush him back to the precinct, Jerry unfortunately breathes his last. Grief-stricken, Ray carries Jerry in, which leads Frank to know about losing his friend. By dawn, Gabriel is informed about the trouble with the local police, only for Thomas to be reprimanded about giving excuses. Concerned only with getting himself safely across the border to Mexico, Gabriel demands for things to be done as per the plan. Meanwhile, Ray contacts John to inform him that Gabriel will indeed be getting to Summerton. Having seen what the men were working on, he lets John know that a mobile assault bridge has been put together for Gabriel to easily cross the border. Informed about the SWAT team still about an hour away, however, Ray realizes that the safety of his town is up to him. Getting in touch with the SWAT's captain, meanwhile, John authorizes him to destroy any bridge they come across on their way to Summerton. Right behind the SWAT team already, Gabriel speeds up to pass them by and then turns the car around. Confidently confronting them now, he causes them to crash into each other, thereby ensuring that his way ahead to Summerton is clear. When news reaches the precinct about the helpless immobilization of the SWAT team, Ray's determination to defend the town further solidifies. While Mike tries to tell Ray that they cannot stand against Gabriel's caliber, Frank decides to step up as a former U.S. Marine. Ray deputizes him to fight in Jerry's honor, which inspires Mike to believe in their strength as well. Convinced that they have a mole in their midst, meanwhile, John asks for a financial background check on everybody on the team. Back at the precinct, Sarah admits to having been scared beyond measure during the fight. Insisting that the feeling is normal, Ray speaks from his experience and tells her that the worst of the fear is yet to come. Choosing to verify if Ray's information is credible by checking satellite images of the area, John plans to mobilize several agents in the vicinity towards Summerton. Looking to increase the firepower of the town's defense, meanwhile, Ray and his crew head to meet Lewis. Realizing that he would have to provide weapons and ammunition from his private museum, Lewis demands to be deputized in return. For the sake of the town's safety, Ray agrees to the condition before the crew prepares to face the threat endangering their town. Heading out then, they plan to gather as many vehicles as possible for the blockade in town. Warning the townsfolk at the diner, Ray advises them to at least stay away from the windows if they won't agree to return home. On their way to Summerton aboard a chartered flight, meanwhile, Phil shows John the satellite images he asked for as clear evidence of a mobile bridge built across the canyon. Shocked by the perfection of Ray's understanding of the situation, John learns about his past in the narcotics department of the LAPD, which Ray had eventually left because of an operation gone awry that had resulted in the end of most of his team. Working on blocking off both streets into town, meanwhile, Ray gets Sarah to be a spotter on the roof in the main square and asks Frank and Lewis to meet him at the school's yard. Thomas Burrell and his men, on the other hand, prepare for an ambush. Reporting their arrival back to Ray, Sarah and Mike are asked not to engage until the rest of their team gets there as well. Unfortunately, Christy gets back from a milk run for the diner just then. To save her life, Mike defies Ray's direct order and opens fire. Despite being thoroughly scared and outnumbered, Mike prevails and attacks Thomas and his men with renewed fervor. He is eventually hit by a sniper, whom Sarah then promptly takes down. Just then, Frank crashes through the blockade in town with a school bus, only to reveal Ray and Lewis manning a machine gun aboard the bus. Rapidly taking out several insurgents then, Ray asks where Thomas has placed his sniper. When Sarah lets him know that he is on the roof of the building adjacent to the diner, Ray gets on his way to the diner's roof. Noticing a guy headed in Sarah's direction, meanwhile, Frank heads up to warn her even as Ray takes down the sniper and jumps off with him. Brutally attacking Sarah's pursuer then, Frank successfully ends his life. Left to defend the school bus by himself, Lewis takes out his attacker just as Mike and Ray are revived. On his way towards Mike then, Lewis is shot at by Thomas. While Frank and Sarah get him to safety at the diner, Ray launches a focused attack on Thomas. Taking over the school bus, Thomas urges Ray to come at him. With experience on his side, Ray takes a practiced fatal shot at his head. Gabriel arrives in town just then and zooms through what is left of the blockade. Pushing Ellen out of his car, Gabriel speeds through the fields on his way to the bridge even as Ray joins him with the mayor's car. Skilled at handling the car, Gabriel confidently continues on his way until he manages to get Ray off him. Unable to see the other because of the tall crops in the field then, the two come to a stop before Ray carefully gets going again. Checking the GPS to see how close to freedom he is, Gabriel also sets off at full speed then, closely followed by Ray. Forcibly changing course then, both cars eventually collide into a windrower parked in the field. Unwilling to give up this close to the country's border, Gabriel sets off on foot towards the bridge. When he reaches the bridge, however, he finds Ray already waiting there for him. Desperate to cross the border, Gabriel offers Ray a bribe, only to be promptly turned down. Underestimating Ray because of his age, Gabriel decides to fight him and soon finds him quite equally matched. Ray's strength allows him to somehow overwhelm Gabriel into being overpowered, thereby leading to his fair victory. Dragged back off the bridge, Gabriel sneakily attacks Ray with a knife but still isn't able to avoid being stabbed in return. Offering a bribe yet again only gets Gabriel arrested. John arrives in town with his team meanwhile, and meets Frank and Sarah. They then spot Ray driving the mayor's battered car into town just then while dragging Gabriel along. Placing Gabriel back in federal custody, John then proceeds to arrest Ellen as well, since the background checks revealed the bribe she accepted. While Lewis and Mike prepare to be taken to the hospital for treatment, John walks over to Ray. Sincerely appreciating his efforts, he thanks Ray for nabbing Gabriel before taking his leave. When Frank returns the deputy badge to Ray, he asks him to hold on to it instead, saying that he truly earned it. He also mentions that Jerry would have liked his friend to keep it as well. Heading into the diner then, they are stopped by the mayor's shock over the condition of his car. Having had enough to deal with already, Ray simply asks him not to park in the fire zone again.